Okay, good morning. You are live.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our budget planning session this morning. It's January 25th, and we're a few minutes after 9. I'd like to start with the pledge. Councillor Bengomo, could you lead us in the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the flag for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councillor.
Apologies, Mayor Pro Tem, I was on mute.
No worries, Councillor Bengomo. I think there is a bit of confusion this morning about who should be on this meeting, and I appreciate that. I'm going to hand this over to Leanne. I see Leanne here, so thank you, Leanne.
Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, thank you so much for meeting with us this morning. This is our FY 2022 budget kickoff, our budget retreat. Let me share with you my screen. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Okay, do you see the full screen?
We do, Leanne.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm going to jump right in because we have a very full schedule for you. We're excited about today. We hope that you will be as excited as we are. We, of course, right now we're doing our greeting and introductions, and I'd like to introduce the team. I, of course, will be doing the revenue projections in the end of the year. Along with me is my team. As you know, my senior analyst, which is Matt Sines, my other budget analyst, Sherelle Dela Cruz, and William Blanchard, as you well know. We also have Shirjana Bessanet, who I did. Sorry, somebody was asking me if I started the slideshow, and I think I did. You do see it, correct? Okay, great. Okay. Want to introduce
all good.
Shirjana Bessanet, who will be talking about Elevate Las Cruces, and a big shout out and thank you to David Weir as well, and Larry Nichols. Also, we have a guest speaker today. He is from Strong Towns, Chuck Marone, who Shirjana will be introducing. We're very excited about him joining with us. And then, of course, our capital improvement program, which is David Cedillo, which is our public works director, and a big shout out to his deputy, interim deputy, Tony Trevino, and his management analyst, Sarah Cundiff. And then, of course, we hope to leave a little bit of time for discussion as well. I wanted to give you the budget timeline. Excuse me. As you know, in October,
Mayor Pro Tem, my apologies for interrupting, Leanne. This is Councillor Bencomo. I don't think your slides are moving. If you're moving them, we're on the first slide still.
Okay, hang on. Let me hit escape, see if I can get out of them, and let me see if I can reshare. Thank you so much, Councillor, for letting me know.
Leanne, you should just be able to hit F5. Sorry, this is Barbara DeLeon to start the session.
F5?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I hit F5. Control F5?
No.
Yes.
Okay, hang on.
There you go. They're moving now if you're intending them to move.
Okay, hang on.
No worries, Leanne. You take your time.
Okay, I'm just going to leave them like this if this is okay with you. I know it doesn't give, if I give the full screen, for some reason I have 3 screens up and it just, are they progressing now?
Yes.
Yay,
Yes.
we're on. Okay. Okay. As you can see, back in October, we met with you on the state legislation. As you know, the state has, they're in the middle of the legislation right now. You met with Larry Haran. And with the grants, we brought to you a work session and of course a resolution for those capital improvements. Then in November, David Cedillo and myself and staff met with each of you individually to go over your budget priority meeting. And we will have a slide showing what came out of those budget priority meetings as well. And then of course, today is our budget retreat. So moving forward, this is what we have to, for you. You should start seeing some invitations popping up around March the 8th through the 12th. We want to set up again with you individual budget meetings. And we'll look at your schedule and work with Annette to set those up. And then March the 22nd, which is actually earlier than we typically have, but we will be bringing a work session to council. Part of our charter states that we have to bring to council 60 days before we start the new fiscal year. This is a little bit earlier, but that's okay. We want to bring to you what we have at March the 22nd, and that will be after the individual meetings that we have with you. And then April 26th, we have to have a public hearing. That's part of our charter as well. And typically what we do is we have the public meeting before work session. We'll be doing a full presentation. And then on May 24th, we will be bringing a resolution to you, 2 resolutions, one for the budget, one for the CIP for adoption of our FY22 budget. I also wanted to point out here, counselors, that at any time, if you need to meet with, David on the CIP or myself, we can set up those meetings. If there's additional information that you want, please reach out to us for anything. If we don't have the answer, trust me, we will find it. We definitely will. You know that about us. We work very hard, and we just want to give all the information that we can for you to make the best decisions. Okay, you've seen this slide. You saw it Friday at our strategic meeting that was from our vendor management partners. I think one of the things I want to stress in here is that I took over the budget in 2018 in the middle of the year. We do use statistical econometric modeling. I am conservative. As you can see, our budget versus actuals for 2020, our actuals were a little bit higher, yay. We had 5.5 months of COVID during this time. And during that time, we saw a lot of construction going on. That was one of the essential things that the governor said could continue. So we see a lot of construction and housing. That was been very apparent in the reports that Larry Nichols gives in his community development report. We also saw a very high upshift in food and medical in the hold harmless. And as you know, in the hold harmless, every year our hold harmless is going down somewhere between 6 and 7%. So there was a lot of people during these 5.5 months buying a lot of groceries. I think that we all saw that at the grocery store when we went, and there was an upshift in the medical as well. Now, this slide was not in the presentation on Friday. This is where budget feels that we will be ending fiscal year 2022. As you can see, we do not anticipate our gross receipts tax going down. Shared services, just a little bit. So what is shared services on this particular graph is license plates. We do receive money from license plates. And I did reach out to the motor vehicle department. They told me that people are not, they're speculating that people are not driving, so they're not registering their vehicles. And so what will happen is that probably next year, you're gonna see an increase in the shared services for license plates. And I say next year because hopefully we'll be out of COVID, everything will go back to normal and everybody will be back on the street. Keeping my fingers crossed, okay? So-
Wishful thinking, Leanne.
I know, positiveness,
Positive thinking.
Right. So really what I wanted to point out to you is the investment income. I think I brought this to you on Friday. You will see a budget adjustment coming to you for the mid-year, February the 1st, by the way. Matt will be bringing that forward to you. There's lots of information in that resolution. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. However, one of the things that we will be giving a budget adjustment on is investment income. Our rate of return, as you know, has not been very strong. And of course, this budget was prepared before COVID. We went ahead and adopted, if you'll remember, we went ahead and adopted our 21. We did not go in there and adjust anything for 21 and COVID. And it was sort of a good thing because we didn't know how it was going to react. And as you know, Francisco and I worked with the state. We thought that it was really just going to be terrible, and it wasn't. It hasn't been, let's put it that way. We also see fees going down in Parks and Rec, but as you know, there's no baseball games going on. I sort of miss that. When you drive down Hadley, you know, typically you see lots of crowds out. Nobody's there. It's very, you know, all the fields are sitting there. Being an ex-baseball player, I sort of miss that, missing watching the games and stuff like that. But when we get back to normal, we'll start seeing all those again. We also see a decrease in police and muni court fees, you know, due to not, the police chief, due to not wanting to get exposure for the police officers. We just don't see a lot of fines and fees coming from the police department. We also do not see warrant fees and fees coming from muni court as well. I will tell you, I've reached out to the police department. Next week, or this week, I have a meeting with them to discuss their fines and fees and hopefully get additional information. So if you're wondering about that, once we have our meetings, I can reach out to you and give you that information as well. So. And then, of course, our other revenue is like our museums and our libraries. And of course, we're going to see some of this other revenue coming down, but not really bad, you know, because we still have operations going on right now in those areas. So we just anticipate maybe a little bit of a decrease there. And of course, we will be bringing to you a budget adjustment around March and April for all of these to fix the revenues. And what we're anticipating is that we will end the fiscal year with about 100.1 instead of 102.8. Excuse me. This was a slide that I presented to you on Friday. This is our general fund revenue forecast. As you can see, the main point that I want to give to council is that you'll see that our revenues throughout the next 5 years is very static. It's you know, status quo. It's very even. But you have to remember, every year our hold harmless is going down somewhere between 6 and 7%. So our own economy, okay, the city's economy is actually matching that decrease in the hold harmless. So while this looks flat, it really isn't. I mean, we should, you know, we're not seeing our revenues going down. We're actually seeing a slight increase. So as we keep having, you know, businesses come in, you know, you're going to start seeing hopefully some LEDA, you know, coming in here, new businesses, bringing in new jobs. That is the growth that we need to help us with that hold harmless. Okay, this is a very busy slide and I apologize for that. This last column where it says council priorities, these are the priorities that you gave me in November. I'm not going to go through this slide, you know, line by line, council. I apologize for that. I will want you to know that I am going to send you this PDF. This presentation after the meeting. It was recommended by Barbara that I send this to you, and I should have sent it to you beforehand, and I apologize. But one of the things I really wanted to stress in this was I wanted to, on Friday's meeting, you haven't adopted because this is not going to council, but you have come out of the strategic planning on Friday with some strategic themes. And so as you can see, there's a legend below there with those themes. I sort of did some acronyms and I apologize for that. But I really think that what's important here is that you've got these strategic themes. We have now put those short-term priorities that are in Elevate together with those themes, okay? And they met with the November council priority meetings. So that last column that you see, counselors, that's what we're going to be using. Budget is going to be using this PowerPoint, this particular slide, to be working on our budget for fiscal year 2022. And that is one of the other reasons why we want to have those individual meetings with you, to make sure that we're picking up or trying to budget everything that we possibly can during those priority meetings. And so with that, I'm going to ask, I think Shauna Besnet is going to try to take over the screen so she can control and talk about Elevate Las Cruces. Shoshana?
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning, Shurjana.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, City Councilors. I'm just going to share my screen, actually, Leanne, so we can get the.
Did I stop sharing?
Yes, you did. Thank you. All right. Does everybody see this?
I can see it. We can see it. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So, Srijana Basnet, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department. As you know, the city's comprehensive plan, Elevate Las Cruces, was adopted by the City Council to create a collective vision and move us towards sustainable growth for the next 25 years. We are now in the process of implementing our plan. While Elevate provides guidance for growth and development, other even more detailed plans and policies like the Active Transportation Plan or the Parks and Rec Master Plan can help us, further those larger goals in Elevate. Ultimately, though, we need to use various implementation tools to ensure that ideas and policies translate into on-the-ground actions. My purpose today is to give you a brief overview of Elevate and touch on how the city's budget and capital improvement program will be critical to the success of the plan. While the vision framework provides the big picture of what we want to be as a city and a community, the policy framework contains the goals, policies, and actions. And here's an example of that structure using the goal of balanced growth, a need-based annexation policy, and the related action to develop a fiscal impact analysis tool, which would be used to figure out the cost and benefits associated with any potential annexations. Okay, and for every goal, as you all know, there are several policies and actions. In fact, there are more than 500 actions recommended in the Elevate work program. This work program is in a table format, and for each action, it identifies the main department leading or coordinating that item and the potential partners, both internal and external to the organization. It also identifies what type of action is required, whether it's a new capital or operational expenditure, a new or modified program, process, or policy. It can also be a regulatory action requiring ordinance changes or simply an action identifying the need for further study to take place before the best solution can be pursued. Finally, Elevate goes beyond any of our past comprehensive plans and actually lets us know which actions should be initiated sooner rather than later. Some actions are already in progress and identified as ongoing, and everything else is either short, mid, or long-term. The short-term work program is a list of actions identified through several rounds of stakeholder input, and those would ideally be initiated or supported in the next 1 to 3 years. This is where the strategic plan will ideally play a role, since most strategic plans focus on the near term and they guide which projects, actions, or programs should receive funding and resource allocation. Most items on the strategic plan have a natural connection to the Elevate work program, but the strategic plan can also contain items that City Council has called for through other lower level or more specific plans and policies. Okay, so the budget is tied very closely to the city's strategic plan and the various departments' strategic business plans. These plans, in turn, should be aligned with the Elevate Las Cruces work program and the overall policy framework. So they are working in concert with each other and are not undermining efforts or stretching the organization too thin. I modified one of Leanne's slides that she likes to share with you on aligning Elevate with performance-based budgeting. One of the objectives of budgeting tied to expected results is better accountability. Going even further than that is the performance reporting, where success is measured and tracked over time. The first baseline performance report for Elevate Las Cruces was completed last year and forwarded to the City Council by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Continuous monitoring and reporting will play a role in ensuring goals are achieved in a timely and predicted manner. It also forces us to realize when something's not working or is not having the impact that we thought it would, and it allows us to tweak or modify our actions. This creates an environment for both successful implementation and resiliency. Moving on to the physical framework of Elevate, there is a direct relationship between the future development program and Elevate and how we invest in our community's infrastructure. So Article 6.03 of the City Charter states that the comprehensive plan shall serve as a guide for all future city actions concerning land use and development, the financing and location of capital improvements. Before taking any action, the City Council shall cause a finding and report to be made, which demonstrates that relationship. In past comprehensive plans, we did not have what is called a future land use map, which is typical of most comprehensive plans. However, Elevate not only recognizes the shortcomings of conventional land use planning, it goes several steps further. It provides a physical framework, which includes a future development program and a future thoroughfare program. So this is one of the maps that is in Elevate Las Cruces. The future development map, or the FDM as we call it, was based on the consensus growth scenario developed by the City Council and the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, which included members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. If you all recall, we had that exercise during the process of planning. This scenario was selected because we believe in balanced growth, providing enough room to grow while also directing reinvestment into the heart of our city. The FDM also has place type overlays where specific areas or corridors are identified as major investment areas. The idea is to direct resources or capital investment in places that can have a greater return on our investment or catalyze development or redevelopment. It also lends itself to the creation or enhancement of neighborhood and town centers and mixed-use corridors. Corridor transportation planning through the Future Thoroughfare Program and map, as shown right now, is also directly tied to future decision-making on capital investments. We can't have beautiful, safe, vibrant, and healthy neighborhoods without addressing what kind of streets run through them and connect them to each other and to other amenities in the city. As you all know, the city has an active transportation plan, short and long-range transportation plans, a Parks and Rec master plan, and other policies that guide the development of what could be a world-class transportation and recreational network in Las Cruces. When we recognize that people need places with both meaning and value, we can build and sustain places that people love. So with that note, and I do see that Mr. Mayor has joined us. I don't know if Mayor Pro Tem, should I pause?
Yeah, yes, Mayor has joined us. Are you done, Sertana, or do you have more to discuss?
This is my last slide. I'll conclude.
All right.
With that note, I'll just conclude by reiterating my two main points today. The two most effective tools to implement our city's comprehensive plan are the operational budget that resources programs and provides appropriate staffing levels to get things done, and the capital budget that funds projects that can make or break our community in the long run. Finally, Elevate Las Cruces not only challenges the way we prioritize our CIP projects, but recommends that when we evaluate our projects, community benefit be given equal weight to operational criteria. Change takes time, but our comprehensive plan identifies ways in which the CIP process can, in the future, align better or more with the city's physical framework. By doing so, it will support more clearly the city council and community's goals for a sustainable city. And with that, Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. Mayor and City Councilors, I conclude my part of the presentation and would like to introduce Mr. Chuck Marone, founder and president of Strong Towns, a 501c3 nonprofit. Chuck is an author, professional engineer, and land use planner. He has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities and towns across North America and was named one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all time by Planetizen. Mr. Mayor and City Councilors, through several recent planning efforts, we've explored concepts like walkability, financial stewardship, placemaking, community prosperity. Chuck has a way of expanding on these and other related topics that make us rethink or reaffirm some of our own practices. Please welcome Mr. Chuck Marone.
Mayor Pro Tem, this is Lan. I don't think we had invited Mr. Marone to join us at 9:35. We're a little bit ahead of our schedule. I apologize for that. However, I did send him a text message asking him to sign in, so he should be hopefully trying to get on. Right now, I'm looking through the participants and do not see him yet. So maybe what we might want to do at this time is if you have some questions for maybe myself and my team, and also with Shirjana, we can do that until Mr. Marone gets online.
Thanks, Leanne. Well, good morning, everybody. Apologize for my mix-up. I just took it for granted that what I had down was the continuation of our meeting on Friday. So anyway, so who's asked questions of the presentation that was just given? Councilor Bencomo?
For some reason, I can't raise my hand. Is anyone else having that issue? I did have a question though. Thank you for that presentation. It's very thorough. My questions have to do specifically with your presentation. I just wondered, well, it does. I wondered about, Leanne, you had on one of your lines, the sort of budget for municipal court. And this is just sort of for my curiosity. What is that relationship between council and municipal court? I feel like it's been a year and I'm just now realizing that I know very little about that relationship and how we function. And is it more like we're fiscal sponsors? What is that? And is it appropriate for me to ask for a work session to understand more about it and their needs? Or is that not necessarily in our purview?
So Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, that's a really great question. In our, I'm going to use our organizational chart. I'm also going to ask maybe Barbara and Ifo to help me a little bit as well. If you look at, and Jennifer is online, thank you. Jennifer can really explain it. But if you look at our organizational chart, it gives a really great diagram, but I'm going to let Jennifer explain that to you even more detailed. She really knows.
Good morning, Council. Good morning, Mayor. The relationship with municipal court is defined by law, and particularly there's a case called, I'm really bad at some of this, Maurer v. City of Albuquerque. And in that case, it determined that the branch, the judicial branch of government is completely separate than the executive and legislative. So what the city council does is give and determine a budget, and the judge can determine how that budget is allocated. They can determine their own personnel rules. They can make all determinations on their own, independent of the city. The interesting part of that is you determine the city council determines the budget. However, in the event that somebody within the city municipal court is sued, the city is named. So we are still responsible. We're still responsible for personnel and things that happen. However, the municipal court judge is in charge of how that is allocated. I think we have a good relationship with our municipal court judge. There's some communication there, but there is independence.
Is there ever, Jennifer, an opportunity for us as a council to meet with the judge to discuss, like, I have these needs, I have these goals, or is that not necessarily allowed or appropriate?
Mayor and city council, it is appropriate. I've been in other cities where the municipal court judge will make a budget presentation. It's just a request. And so that can be handled in many different ways. You all can determine, the judge can determine that she would like to make a presentation to the city council. That's entirely up to the judge, but right now we have one presiding judge and then we have another position also. So, but that's entirely up to the judge, and the city council can put that on their agenda as well. Or they don't have to, but it's up to you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. That's very helpful. And did anyone figure out the hand thing?
Mayor, Counselor, it's not working for me either.
No, me neither.
And not working for me either. So my hand is up.
Well, I guess you could theoretically use those little hand where it has the reactions, and I'll just kind of, yeah, there you go. And I'll just try to do it that way, if that's okay. So Councilor Sword, you have if I may just kind of chime in along what Jennifer says. So Councilor Bencomo, you bring up a good question. I think for years, the council always knew about the separation between the judicial side and the executive side, which were considered. For the most part, we just give them a certain amount for the budget and they just handle their things. Now, if they were to lose a judge, then with consent of council, I get to appoint that judge. Or if we need to have an additional judge, and then, but that's really about it. That's to the extent of it. I think these last two judges that we've had, I think we've had a good relationship with them, which in the past, I'm not saying that we never had, it's just it was really hands off back then. We never really even knew a whole lot about it. And so I think it was until recently when we were discussing future courthouses that we started to get a little bit more response, or a little bit more meetings with the city judges. So, okay, Councilor Sword.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question for Sujana. Could you say in a couple sentences what the implementing of Elevate Las Cruces is going to need in the budget? And what are the CIP policy changes that are going to be needed going forward?
Ms. Mayor, Councilor Sorg, could you repeat the first part of your question, please? Yeah.
What are you going to need? Come on.
Contacting your doctor for an alternative.
Jeez. Telephone doesn't work sometimes. What are we going to need in the budget to implement the Elevate Las Cruces? We'll start with that.
So the budget itself, sort of is the city manager's way of establishing his direction for city staff. But really, what kind of happens is it kind of comes both ways with, the city council's policy direction. Staff will ensure that those projects or action items or programs are part of their departmental asks. And so they'll request things in the budget to make sure that they can conduct the work that is required to achieve some of those goals, right? And then ultimately, the city manager will present that to you as the city council, and your role would be to just make sure that everything you want to accomplish has been accounted for and resourced through the budget. So that's like a very brief way to explain that. Of course, there's a lot of detail that goes into the department's strategic plans and their programming and their staffing, but really the budget is one way to look at operationalizing, some of these policies.
So if we were to say that we want to implement Elevate Las Cruces as fast as possible, then the city manager would implement a budget that would try to do that, correct?
I would let the city manager answer that question himself, but
Okay. Okay, that's good. I'm sure he would say that too. So what does the CIP policy direction have to do with Elevate Las Cruces, or does it not?
So it does.
Okay.
And as I explained earlier, what exists in the city charter is this requirement to tie the CIP directly to the comprehensive plan. So the city council is required to have a findings and a report to support every aspect of the CIP, because that is how policy translates into investment, right? So that's your connection. Because Elevate Las Cruces is this, overarching plan. It's got more than 500 action items in it. You'll be utilizing your strategic plan to really focus on some of those, right? And then that gets translated into budget, CIP, et cetera. So overall, all of these need to work in concert with each other. But the CIP does need to reflect those overarching values.
Okay, I understand that. That's awesome. And Mr. Mayor, sorry I was late. I had to have a COVID-19 test for some further medical procedures coming up this week. And when the medical profession asks you to do something, I guess I have to do it. So that's why I was late. Thank you.
Just try not to let it happen again. But I'm just kidding.
Mayor, this is Leanne. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but I've just noticed that our guest speaker, Chuck Marone, is on the line. I'm going to turn it over and let Shirjana sort of introduce him again.
Sounds good. Thanks.
I think I already mentioned Chuck is, a land use planner and a PE and the founder and president of Strong Towns. I will let Chuck get right to his what will be, I hope, a wonderful presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to be here and it's very nice to see you all. We've gotten used to doing things this way, but that doesn't change the fact that it would be very nice to be with you, and hopefully we can do that at some point here too. Thanks for the opportunity to share some ideas. I know you're in a master planning process.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt, and I know we already introduced you, but can you state your name, please? And
you're fine. In fact, I was trying to change my name on my screen, but it won't let me. My name is Chuck Marone. I am a planner and an engineer with an organization called Strong Towns. We work to try to advocate for a model of development that allows our cities to become financially strong and resilient. I started a blog back in 2008, and it has grown into an international movement of people with thousands of members and millions of people in our audience who are trying to share the message that I'm going to take some time and go over with you today. As was said, I'm a licensed engineer. I'm a professional planner, and I'm happy to be here with you. So if you don't mind, I will start where I wanted to share this with you off the bat, because I think sometimes strategic planning processes or master plan processes are difficult ones. I want to throw this idea out there because I think it's important in terms of what comes next. There's a saying that we have at Strong Towns: the more people involved in implementing a plan, the simpler that plan needs to be. Contrasting, the fewer people involved in implementing a plan, the more complicated it can be. I think when we're doing city planning, when we're doing master planning, we tend often to look at it like a IKEA type of instruction manual, not really acknowledging the fact that there's many people that are going to be involved in implementing this. The best plans that I've seen, the best plans that I've been around are the ones that recognize the sheer complexity of what we're doing and simplify it down to first principles. So our organization is about a model of development that allows our cities to become financially strong and resilient. I want to start my conversation with you by talking about complexity and complex adaptive systems. When we think about a rainforest, we're looking at a system that is complex, one where there's many different flora, fauna, they interact in novel ways. When we look at a rainforest, we know that despite the order that is apparent, that order is emergent. It's not imposed or planned. We recognize these as complex adaptive systems. What we often fail to recognize is that this is also a complex adaptive system. Many individual actors acting independently of their own volition, coming together in an order that is not necessarily planned, but emerges from all of these complex interactions. Complex adaptive systems are resilient, they're adaptable, and they are strong. This is different from systems that are merely complicated. Systems that are complicated have lots of things going on. This is a Rube Goldberg machine. The novelty of a Rube Goldberg machine is that it is very complicated. But if we think about a Rube Goldberg machine, if we cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks or change one of these systems, the system doesn't adapt and evolve and change. It simply stops working. It simply breaks. This is the fundamental difference between a system that is complex and adaptable and a system that is merely complicated. When we look at a rainforest and we contrast that to a cornfield, we're looking at the difference between a system that will evolve and adapt and one that is designed with a different premise in mind. If we give a rainforest too much rain or too much sun in a certain cycle, it doesn't fail. It doesn't fall apart. It doesn't collapse. It may evolve and change in novel ways. When we do that to a cornfield, when we give it too much rain or too much sun, it doesn't start to become soybeans. It doesn't grow into wheat or barley. It simply fails as corn. We see the same type of behavior in human habitat. When we have systems that are complex and adaptable, when they act in iterative, incremental ways, what we see is that they're able to adapt and change to stress and opportunity over time. When we build cities in ways that are merely complicated, when we take that complexity out and we try to simplify them down to be just complicated systems, we wind up with systems that are fragile. They lack the capacity to adapt. And in a word, they lack strength. If we go back and we study cities for thousands and thousands of years, we see a very simple pattern of development, one that has changed radically over the last century, but one that has thousands of years of precedent. This is actually my hometown. I'm speaking to you from Brainerd, Minnesota. It is 15 degrees out today. For some context, there's lots of snow on the ground. It's a slightly different environment than all of you live in. This is what my hometown would have looked like back in 1870. A series of little pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about what the future would become. I know your city at one point looked this way as well. In fact, every city that was ever built in all of human history began with a series of little pop-up shacks just like this. For a variety of reasons, people would come together and they would build places like this. Many of them would fail. When they would fail, people would salvage the materials. They would move on to the next place. But when they would succeed, what you would see is that they would start to grow in a very simple way. They would start to grow incrementally up incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish. This is the way all complex adaptive systems grow and change over time. So after a period of 30 years, this street here would grow to look something like this. This is the exact same street from roughly the same spot about 3 decades later. And as land values would continue to rise, as more and more people would move to this place, as more energy would coalesce around here, the development pattern would continue to grow in this complex adaptive way, incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. And you would wind up with a street that looked like this. These 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. This is the way complex adaptive systems grow and evolve and change. Beginning in the Great Depression and then accelerating after World War II, we began to treat our cities not as complex adaptive systems, but as systems that were merely complicated, as ones we could sit down and master plan and design and lay out where the pipe would go, where the roads would go, where the buildings would go. And we could, in a sense, use our capital and our might to kind of impose a vision on what otherwise would be a complex adaptive system. That's certainly what my city did and what thousands of cities across North America have done. This exact same street today looks like this. This is essentially a shot taken from this location. This is what this street looks like now. And the thrust of the conversation I want to have with you today about the financial health of cities, about return on investment, about how we build places that are strong and successful, starts with an understanding that there's $500,000 of public infrastructure in this little stretch of street right here. Where is the tax base that will sustain that public investment? Where is the wealth that is going to allow us to go out and fix that street, fix that sidewalk, fix that pipe, maintain all this infrastructure, not just tomorrow, but decades and decades into the future? It used to be there. We used to have it. We don't have it anymore. Why? And how do we adapt to this? It's important to grasp how radical a change this was. Going through the Great Depression, going through World War II, was a transformative time, obviously, for the United States, a transformative time for North America. It's important to understand that at the end of this, there was this sense at the end of the war that with millions of troops coming home, with businesses and industry kind of ramping down from war production, that what was the most likely outcome was that our economy was going to slide right back into depression. There was nothing fundamentally different about our economy in 1945 than there was in 1935. Without all the war spending, without all the war employment, economists at the time thought we were just going to slide right back into the depths of the Depression. Of course, that's not what happened, right? What happened is we took all of this tools we had, we took all of this might we had, and we redirected it into creating a new version of America. We recreated, we took this power and capacity we had and said, we are going to go out and solve the many, many problems historically of the city by building this new version of what America could be. I want to show you what this looks like because this was incredibly successful. We still nostalgize today the growth, the job creation, the powerful middle class, the things that came about because of this. And I want to show you in time how this changed radically cities and how we approach their development. This is the city of Fresno. I use Fresno because we have great maps of Fresno, but really every city in North America that was existing at the time went through very similar things post-World War II. This is the city limits of Fresno in 1897. Watch how it changes over time. Here's 1909, here's 1922. Now we've got 1934, and then up to the end of World War II, you can see that incremental pattern of development, that incremental growing up, incremental growing out, and incremental becoming more intense. Now we create an approach to kinetic growth where our goal is not necessarily to mature cities as a culture growing in a petri dish, kind of harmonizing all those complex variables. Our goal is merely to grow. How do we resist going back into depression? How do we grow as quickly as possible? And what we see is that this pattern of development after World War II creates explosive levels of growth. We are able to grow our cities very quickly. We're able to create a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities. And you can see this reflected in the pattern of development. The pattern of development we came out, no longer with an increment of up and no longer with an increment of increased intensity. This is Fresno in 2010. And if you think about this, like for me, I look at my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. We are roughly 14,000 people. Today, back at the end of World War II, we were roughly 14,000 people. My city has not grown in population in nearly 80 years, yet the size of my community has grown 10 times. There's 10 times as much road, there's 10 times as much sewer and water infrastructure, there's 10 times as much area to police and provide fire protection to, with essentially the same number of people. This is some data we have from Lafayette, Louisiana that shows this trade-off and this dichotomy that we deal with. At the end of World War II, Lafayette had a population of a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000. It's a 3.5 times increase. It's a huge amount of growth in a very short period of time. Yet when we go back to the end of World War II, we recognize that it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide water service to the city, to the people who lived in Lafayette. Today, it takes 50 feet of pipe per person, a 10 times increase. At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants for 1,000 people to provide the city of Lafayette, the people who live there, fire protection. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. So we can look and we can say, yes, we've experienced incredible amounts of growth. And if we measure our success in terms of growth, Lafayette has had it. They've increased their population by 3.5 times. It's taken 10 times and 20 times the liabilities in order to do that. Is the city of Lafayette better off? Are the people there better off? When we step back and look, what we recognize is that while we can grow our population very quickly, it requires us to grow our liabilities very, very quickly. We're not growing our wealth nearly as quickly. What we see in the city of Lafayette is what we see in cities all over North America. Our family incomes are up only a small fraction of the percent. Our net worth as a community is down dramatically. Our families are taking on more debt. They have less disposable income. This pattern of development is not actually building wealth within our communities. It's creating a lot of transactions, a lot of growth, a lot of velocity of money in our economy, but it's not actually making our places better off. The mechanism here is rather easy to understand. And I'm going to go through a series of 3 case studies to walk you through the financial transactions of post-war development so that you can see how this would apply. This is a dead-end cul-de-sac. This is just a residential style of development. When this was built, the city went in and paved the road, and the city paid for half the cost of this road, while the residents along it paid the other half. We took a look at the amount of tax revenue the city collects from the people who live along this road. Now, understand, it's a dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic. There's no commercial traffic. The only reason this road exists is to serve the people along it. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city collects from the people who live on this road, how long is it going to take the city to recoup the amount of money they spent to build it? The answer was 37 years. Now, the road's not going to last 37 years, but it's going to take the city 37 years to break even. When the road falls apart, 100% of the cost becomes the city's now. Where is that revenue going to come from? Not from this development. Here's another development. This one was built in the early 1980s. When this was built, the developer went out and paid for the cost of all the road, all the other infrastructure, built all the homes, sold those homes off. Of course, the cost for building all that infrastructure was wrapped into the sale price of the homes, the value of the homes. People have been paying their mortgages for years. They've been paying their taxes for this to the city for years under the idea that when this fell apart, the city would go out and fix it. That happened. The city went out and fixed the roadway. The cost was $354,000. Again, we asked the question, this is a dead-end loop, dead-end cul-de-sac, no through traffic, no commercial traffic. The only reason this road's here is to serve just these properties. Based on the revenue the city collects from these property owners, how long is it going to take the city to recoup what they just spent to fix the road? The answer is 79 years. If the city wanted to try to collect enough money from these property owners between now and the time the road fell apart, what would that mean? It would mean they would need to do an immediate 46% increase in property taxes. with annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. And understand that the sewer, the water, the storm sewer, all the other systems are vastly more expensive. This is just for the roadway surface itself. Sometimes people will say, okay, Chuck, we get it. We know we lose money on residential property. We make it up on commercial. Commercial is our cash cow. I point out, I don't know any corporation that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why a municipal corporation would think that was a good business strategy. Nonetheless, we've kind of convinced ourselves that if we just build enough industrial, enough residential, enough commercial type of development, we'll be okay. This is a business park. When this one was built, the idea was that the city would go in, build the road, put in the sewer and the water, the drainage systems, make all this investment, and then they would be able to attract people to come in and open up commercial businesses here. That happened. That project was, by that metric, a complete success. The city built this, people came, they opened up buildings, and this park is completely built out. The city felt this was so successful, they wanted to do the same exact thing on property they own right next door. So take this and build a mirror image of it on property they own right next door. We asked the question, if we could do that for the same amount of money and get the same amount of investment, would this actually be a good project? The cost is $2.1 million. The amount of investment that has been made assesses out at $6.6 million. Now, pause for a second, because in the existing park, 4 of the lots belong to a church. Our communities need churches, but the church doesn't pay any taxes to the city. 2 of the lots belong to the school district. Again, we need school district. The school district is very important, but the school district bus maintenance facility doesn't pay any taxes to the city. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance building. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance building. Again, they're very important structures, but not paying any taxes to the community. Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically would be private taxpayers who would pay money to the city, every single one was given a tax subsidy, somewhere between 8 and 25 years, in order to attract them to move into this park. We ran the numbers based on the current park, and it never made sense. It never even paid the interest on the debt. The only way we were able to make this park cash flow is if we assume the following, that within 1 year of the new commercial park being opened, every single lot would be built upon by a full tax-paying, non-subsidized entity, and that every penny of new revenue would go to retiring that debt. If that happened, it would still take the city almost 3 decades, 29 years, to retire that debt, to break even. That's 29 years where everyone else's taxes are going to have to go up to maintain the streets, provide police protection, fire protection, all the other service and maintenance that's required. And that's in an insanely optimistic scenario. Let me walk you through what's going on, because it's actually very simple to understand once you see it. This is a cash flow diagram. Let's pretend that a developer comes in to our community and says, you know, I have this piece of property I would like to build upon. I'm not asking for any subsidies or handouts. I will go out and at my expense build all the residential homes and all the commercial businesses. I'll put in all the pipes and the pumps and the valves and the meters and the roads and the streets and the curb. I'll do that all to your standards. The only thing that I'm asking as a developer is that when I finish making this large investment in your community, that you, the city, the public, the people who live in this community, you agree that you will take over the long-term cost of providing service and maintenance. What would we say? Well, we would say, fantastic, right? You're following all of our rules. You're meeting all of our regulations. You're not asking for any subsidies, any handouts. You're making all this investment. It costs us nothing. This is fantastic. Let's say, though, that we're smart, prudent people. We've heard of this strong town stuff. We want to do what's right. So what we're going to do is, when the money from this new development comes in, we're going to take the portion that would normally get siphoned off and spent on different parts of maintenance throughout the community. And we're just going to set that aside. Every year when that money comes in, we're going to set that aside, because we know a generation from now, we're going to have to make good on that promise that we will provide service and maintenance. We will go out and take care of this stuff. Here's what this looks like from a cash flow standpoint. In year one, everything is brand new, hasn't cost you anything. The money comes in and you take that portion and you set it aside. In year two, you add to what you had in year one. In year three, you add a little bit more. In year four, year five, and on and on and on. And you can see a 5-year-old road isn't costing you anything. A 10-year-old pipe isn't costing you anything. A 15-year-old sidewalk isn't costing you anything. So year after year after year, you have all this money coming in. You get out a couple of decades, you're feeling very, very rich. You've got a big pot of money sitting there. The problem happens when you have to actually make good on this promise that was made a generation ago. And what you find is that the cumulative amount of revenue is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, you run far into the negative. Now, cities aren't one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments, a series of neighborhoods. And so let's say that our developer comes back in a couple of years after that first development and says, you know, that worked really well for you, that worked really well for me. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, the developer comes in and says, you know, I would like to do a similar size development. In other words, the ideal scenario for any city, nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money coming in and we set it aside and we save it for the day when we have to make good on all these promises we're making as we continue to grow. Here's what this looks like. In year one, you've got your first development. It pays in for the entire 25 years shown here. In year three, you add another, in year five, in year seven, and on and on. And what you see is that not only do you not have any expenses in these early years, but you're having growth upon growth upon growth. You're adding cash flow at an accelerating rate. Your cash actually starts to accelerate upwards. And when you get to year 25, the year you have to make good on that very first promise from that very first development, yeah, you're gonna have to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you make money, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money on every project that you do, the further you go out in time, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is how cities can have decades and decades of growth and still not have any cash. This is how we can be growing robustly for generations, yet turn around and say, we don't have the money to maintain our streets. We don't have the money to maintain our sewer system. We don't have the money to maintain our basic systems. It's not that we are not experiencing growth. We are experiencing ample amounts of growth. It's that our growth is not productive. The growth is actually costing us more over the long term in real dollars and cents than it's creating in wealth and tax base and prosperity for our community. Get back to this analog between complex systems and systems that are merely complicated. We've lost the feedback loops, the internal feedback loops, and we've just dedicated ourselves in a very complicated way to one strategy and one approach. Let me show you on a site-specific way what this looks like, because this is something we've systematically done throughout all of our neighborhoods. In communities across the entire continent. I want you to focus on these two blocks here. These are 2 blocks in my hometown. They're right up the street here from where I'm sitting right now. You'll see they're the exact same size, the exact same area. They have the exact same amount of public infrastructure. They essentially cost us the same to provide ongoing service and maintenance to. That block on the left, we've called the old and blighted block. City did a master planning process and we labeled these blocks as blight. What you're looking at on the left is the pop-up shack of the 1920s. If you think of a community growing incrementally up, incrementally out to becoming incrementally more intense, this was the next increment of out. These 3 blocks here in the 1920s were on the far edge of town. And what people were hoping at the time is that, you know, we'll get started with a small little pop-up. Over time, as things would continue to grow, as the neighborhood would continue to prosper, these buildings would eventually get 2nd and 3rd stories. They become more ornate. Of course, that's not what happened. These were built in the 1920s. We had the 1930s and the Great Depression. We had World War II. And then we had a new style of development that just skipped right over these 3 blocks and started building out on the edge. These 3 blocks have stagnated for almost 100 years. The block on the right used to look just like the one on the left. We got it torn down, and now we have the new Taco John's. I recognize that you don't have Taco John's Taco John's you can think of as Norwegian Mexican food. Very popular up here. Some mild cheddar cheese with colored nacho chips. It is ridiculously popular. If you ever make it up here, I would say give it a try, but maybe not. On the right, we have our Taco John's. Here's the thing about Taco John's. Everyone loved this project. We got rid of blight. It met the parking requirements. It met the sign ordinance. It met the floor area ratio. It has a sprinkler system. It has ADA compliant bathrooms. We even got a little bit of green space. We got them to put in a segment of sidewalk. We got some natural plants in the stormwater area. If you go through our checklist for what we said a great development is, we checked every single box on this development. Here's the underlying problem. That old and blighted block on the left has a total value of $1.1 million. Add up all those buildings, add up all their worth, you get a block that's worth 1.1 million. On the right, that shiny and new block, the Taco John's, it's the same size area, it's the same amount of public infrastructure, it's the same cost to us to provide ongoing service and maintenance, yet the value is only $600,000. That old and blighted block in its rundown, dilapidated state is providing the city 78% more taxes than the block on the right. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over and over again. There's a group out of Asheville, North Carolina called Urban 3 that we're very close with. They have done modeling on hundreds of cities around the world. And what we have discovered with that modeling is a pattern that's repeated in city after city. What I'm going to show you right now is financial productivity. You can think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a field, and the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we say that is the most productive part of the farm field. That's where we get the most bushels per acre. What I'm going to show you right now is value per acre. Where do we have the most productive parts of the community? This is Buffalo, New York. I happen to like Buffalo, New York. It's a nice place. I feel bad for their football team having lost last night, but that's kind of the way it goes. Buffalo is a place that has suffered decades of decline. Since World War II, Buffalo has lost population every single year. So it's been a downward stretch. If you go to Buffalo, you will see the decline. You will see the neglect. It's all over. Yet when we step back and we say, where is the most productive parts of Buffalo, New York? Can you point to where the traditional downtown is? Can you point to where that pre-Great Depression, pre-World War II style of development is? It's right in the core. And not only is it this repository of wealth, despite the decline, despite the neglect, it outperforms everything that we've built subsequent. This is a pattern that we see repeated over and over again in cities of all sizes, in cities of all geographies. We can go to cities that are northern cities, cities that are southern cities, cities that are very large, mid-sized, small. We can go to cities on the coast. We can go to cities that are inland, and we see the same pattern. Everywhere where we have pre-Great Depression styles of development, this complex adaptive system, what we see is that we get high levels of financial productivity. We get a system that is highly adaptive, highly flexible, and financially very productive. Everywhere where we go to post-World War II development, especially the further out we go, the less financially productive we get, the more costly it becomes, and the lower our return on investment is. This is Lafayette, Louisiana. Again, I'm going to come back to this one. Unlike the sequence of maps I just showed you, these financial productivity maps, this map is slightly different. It looks very similar, and that's because there's a high correlation here. But what you're looking at here, you can think of not as a revenue map, where's the most wealth producing or revenue producing places. This is actually as a profit and loss map. What we were invited to do along with Urban 3 in Lafayette, Louisiana, was go in and look at all of the city's sources of revenue: sales tax, property tax, utility fees, all of their ongoing sources, and map those out. We came up with a bunch of different maps that showed where those were. We then looked at all of their expenses. Where are their road maintenance costs? Where are their sewer and water maintenance costs? Where's the police protection, fire protection, buildings, what have you? And we mapped all of these up as different. And then at the end, we mashed all these maps together into this map. which you can think of as a profit and loss map. Everywhere where you see a parcel in blue, what you are seeing is a property that pays more in taxes on an annual basis than it requires in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place where you see red, it's the exact opposite. These are places that require more capital, more money to provide ongoing service and maintenance than they generate in revenue for the community. The higher the line goes, the more that disparity is. So what are we looking at here? In the very middle, that is the core downtown of Lafayette. To the right of that, to the east of that, there's a crescent of blue that runs through there. You can see that crescent. Those are some of the older, poorest neighborhoods of the community. Here's a snapshot of what these look like. The top photo here is the downtown core of Lafayette. Again, I happen to like Lafayette. I've spent quite a bit of time there. You can listen to some good Zydeco music and get a taco for about $1. It's a really nice place. But in terms of the eye test, not a place that exudes prosperity, not a place that looks like it's doing great. Financially, when we run the numbers, it's doing amazing. It's creating enormous amounts of revenue, spare cash flow for the community. But the eye test, it looks like it's struggling. Below that, you see one of those neighborhoods in that blue crescent. Obviously, from an eye test, this place looks like it's struggling, and it is. Let me just verify here. What we have done in our analysis is assume that the city would go out and maintain and take care of all of these properties. So when we evaluated the costs, if there was a road there, we assumed the city would maintain that roadway. The fact that the city is not maintaining that roadway, not maintaining those ditches, not providing the level of service, simply means that the disparity is even greater. That blue line would be even higher in real life than what we show it in theoretical on the map. These are neighborhoods that are clearly struggling, but from a cash flow standpoint, really are supporting the rest of the community. They're generating far more revenue than they have in ongoing service and maintenance. All that stuff in red then, that's stuff that is familiar to us. Those are the big box stores, the malls, the strip malls, the gas stations, the franchise restaurants, the curvy cul-de-sac streets with the big houses. That's what you're seeing out in that red area. Right now in the city of Lafayette, the median family pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. In order for the city to maintain everything that they've said they would take care of, in order for them to make good on all the promises that they've made to provide ongoing service and maintenance, median taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family makes would need to get sent back to the city just to maintain what they already have. This won't happen. And this physically can't happen. It's not possible for this to happen. And so at some point, the city of Lafayette is going to have to make some really difficult decisions. And they've actually made some of these now by default. What street are we going to repair? What street are we going to allow to fall apart? What pipe are we going to fix? What pipe are we going to abandon? What neighborhood will we keep? What neighborhood will we walk away from? If this sounds like a community that you've heard of, that's because Detroit has gone through very similar things. Oftentimes, when I talk to people about Detroit, they will say things like, well, my city's nothing like Detroit. Here's all the ways Detroit is different than our city. We don't have anything that we can learn from Detroit. Yet when I look at Detroit, I see a city that was the pioneer of this approach. As the auto city, they were the first city in North America to really, really lean into the idea that we should have growth by horizontal expansion, that we could be better off by walking away from our core neighborhoods, walking away from our core downtown. We could generate lots and lots of growth. Detroit was the model that we all copied. And Detroit's development pattern is 2, 3, 4 decades ahead of everybody else. They're not some strange anomaly. They're just early, right? And the math here is showing us that. I want to point out there's a number of things, and if I had a longer talk, I often get the question to go in depth on this map and explain it. Explain why you have these blue areas and why you have these red. And my first explanation is always dissatisfactory to people. I say it's complex, right? what's going on in Lafayette, we see repeated in city after city after city. You can't just pick out and say, well, the people of Lafayette are different, or they did this or they did that. There's a lot of different things that add up in cities to a similar pattern, despite the different ingredients. I will point out one little thing in Lafayette that I think we can learn from. If you think about people moving to a city pre-Great Depression and building a house in a neighborhood, what they knew and understood in a way that we don't ponder is that in order for their block, their neighborhood, their community to be viable, the wealth and the productivity generated by their investment had to be sufficient at a minimum, like the base minimum, to maintain the stuff right in front of their house. If them and their neighbors couldn't go out with shovels and rakes and take care of the street, no one was going to take care of the street. If the taxes they paid were not enough to maintain the street in front of their house, no one was going to maintain the street in front of their house. This was not something that they pondered. This just was something that was. And it was because this is the way things have always been. If you understand this, how do you build your house? Well, you build your house narrow and deep. You build your house narrow and deep because then the burden of sharing that burden was shared amongst many, many different properties. You had many, many different neighbors that would share that burden with you. Let's say that now we don't care about this. All we care about is how quickly we can grow, how fast we can grow. We don't have this complex feedback telling us we can't afford this. We were able to put that off through debt, through grants, through loans, through new growth, or what have you. All we're worried about is how do we get the next transaction? What happens to this house? The house just rotates, right? Instead of becoming narrow and deep, a very productive style of development, it becomes wide and shallow. This is how you go from 5 feet of pipe per person to 50 feet of pipe per person without really increasing anyone's prosperity or wealth. It's the same exact house. It's just figured on a lot differently. I want to show you a couple styles of development because I think it will help illuminate what we can do now today that is different than what we have been doing, that will allow us to become more productive, more financially successful, more prosperous. Here's a Kmart at $384,000 an acre. Here's a Walmart at $967,000. These are in North Carolina, but really these numbers kind of translate everywhere. These are pretty standard types of productivity. If we go to the core downtown, here's a supper club or a warehouse that was abandoned that now is a supper club, $5 million an acre. And my favorite, Jimmy's Pizza House restaurant, $3.4 million an acre, 10 times the productivity of Kmart, 3.5 times the productivity of Walmart. When we look at Jimmy's Pizza House, what we kind of reflexively see is something that is beneath us. When we're thinking about a master plan process and all the great things we can do and accomplish, when we're thinking about the future of our community and all the stuff that we want to create and bring, Jimmy's seems lesser than that. It seems beneath us. It seems not worthy of our time and attention. Yet when we look at Jimmy's Pizza House, what we see is something that financially is incredibly productive. It requires very little amount of our resources, yet comparatively speaking, produces a lot of wealth. And not only that, who owns Jimmy's Pizza? Jimmy owns Jimmy's Pizza. And who is Jimmy? Well, Jimmy is our neighbor. He lives up the street. His kids go to school with our kids. He goes to the same church that we do. He buys his stuff locally. He banks at a local bank. He uses a local attorney. He uses a local accountant. He's part of our economic ecosystem. When we look at Jimmy's Pizza, we shouldn't be seeing something that is beneath us. We should be seeing something that is the building block of success. It's the foundational block of how we start to build wealth within our communities, how we start to fill in those gaps, create opportunity, create great places, and start to actually create a certain level of wealth and productivity that doesn't exist. So I want to leave you with a few thoughts about things that we can do right now. And then I'd like to take your questions and have a dialogue. There are a few things that we tell all cities because all cities can benefit from this. The first one is that we need to allow the next increment of development intensity by right. If we want to get back to that complex adaptive framework, that growing stronger over time, what we have to do is we have to, from a regulatory environment, allow that next increment of growth to occur. We have to allow that petri dish style of development to thicken up our communities, fill in the gaps. When I say by right, what I mean is you should be able to walk in with a completed permit application at 9 a.m. and walk out by noon with a permit. It should be that easy to do the next thing. What is the next thing? If you're talking about a single family neighborhood, the next thing looks like converting some of those homes to duplexes or allowing accessory apartments or other buildings there. If you're talking about a commercial development, the next increment means adding a second story or subdividing into multiple structures. These things should be very, very simple, very, very easy to do. We should allow the next increment of growth by right everywhere. Along with that, we have the saying at Strong Towns, no neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood should be exempt from change. We have struck this bargain in many of our communities that we will allow our neighborhoods to be under glass, to be frozen in amber, to be museum pieces. But we will pick a handful of neighborhoods where we are going to have radical transformation, where they overnight, in very short periods of time, become completely unrecognizable, radical levels of change. This is a very unhealthy way to grow. It's a very unhealthy way, not only for the dislocation and the economic turmoil in those chosen neighborhoods, but it's not healthy for the other neighborhoods to pretend that they can be exempt from change. We need to have modest levels of change and growth and evolution going on through all neighborhoods at all times. To get there, we need to lower the bar of entry. These are the little pop-up shacks from my hometown. And the fascinating thing about this style of development is that it allowed people to start with nothing and end up with something by their own work. We have, for many, many reasons, raised the bar of entry today. And what that means is that there's a whole lot of people who don't get to play the game, who don't get to participate in the building of our society. What does lowering the bar of entry look like? This building here in my hometown is called a tiny house. Our ancestors, the people who originally built my city, would have called this a house. The reason why we put the idea tiny on the front of it is unclear. In order to build this house today, you have to meet all the requirements of a house. Plus you have to meet requirements, A through subpart M of the tiny house. You have to go beg your neighbors for permission. You have to go genuflect in front of a planning board. You have to get council approval. Why are we doing this for what is really just a starter home? In all of human history, people built small houses. And when they acquired a little bit more money, they would do an addition. They would add on. When they had a kid, they'd put on a second story. When they got a little money saved up, they would put a little addition on the back. This is how we allow people to start with very modest amounts of resources and build something. We should be allowing these, not putting these through extra ringers. Here's what this looks like from a commercial standpoint. This is from the city of Muskegon. Muskegon, Michigan had lots of population loss. They had a downtown full of vacant commercial buildings. They were having a difficult time getting people to move in there and fill those spots. They recognized that the bar of entry was too high. If you were an entrepreneur going in, you were going to have to put in a new sprinkler system, a new ADA compliant bathrooms, do all these things that are very, very important, but would turn an entrepreneur with a crazy idea for how they could be of service to other people in the community into a property developer, which is not what they're good at. So what the city of Muskegon did is they bought a bunch of storage sheds. They went out, they filled a gap in their streetscape. They painted up these funky buildings and they rent them out cheaply to start up entrepreneurs. They don't require long-term leases. They don't require all the stuff that are hangups. They said, we want you to come in, try out your idea, see if you can figure out a way to be of service to the community, to your neighbors, and make a living doing it. And here's the amazing thing. By lowering the bar to entry, they allowed more people to get started. And they now have a downtown full of businesses. And a lot of those businesses have graduated from these storage sheds once they got proof of concept, once they figured out their business model, once they figured out how they could make a living. Finally, especially when we're doing master planning, and this is why I started with those early slides about the complexity we put in our plans. Are they going to be like an IKEA manual, or are they going to be like a vision statement? How many people are going to be responsible for implementing them? I lean more towards a vision statement with less complication, because what we need to do right now from a capital investment standpoint, from a public investment standpoint, is radically shift the way we spend our public dollars. Instead of planning out the next increment of growth, the next big project we're going to do, the next place we can run sewer and water or roadway, the next big development we can do, we actually need to go in and thicken up our communities. We actually need to increase our productivity, get better use out of what we have. And the thing is, that development style is very different. That investment style is very different. And in order to do it right, we need to base it off of an understanding of where people are struggling to use the community as it has been built. We actually need to look at and respond to how people are currently using the city as we have constructed it. At Strong Towns, we actually have a 4-step process for doing this. And it is very simple, but it's incredibly powerful. So this is our process for making public investments. The first step is to go out and humbly observe where people in the community are struggling. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as we have built it? I'm going to emphasize humility here. The idea is to go out and not have a preconceived notion of what you're going to see, what the solution should be, what you're going to find, not to have an idea in mind that you go out and try to find the problem that you have the ideal solution to. The idea is here to literally go out and, with as much humility as we can bring to the table, walk a mile with people, not in their shoes, walk next to them and understand where the city that we've built is difficult for people to use. The second step then is to ask a question. The question is this: what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address this struggle? We've humbly identified a struggle. What is the smallest thing we can do to address that now? Not what is the grant we can get from the state that will fix this, not what is the big program we can do, not is the, what is the thing that will fix this forever? What is the thing we can do with straw bales and duct tape and paint that will make this a little bit better right now? The third step then is to do that thing. Do it right now. Don't have a committee. Don't study it for months. Don't sit around and debate. It's just a small little thing. You can go out and undo it if you want, if it doesn't work out, but just go do it. Build some momentum. Start creating responses to problems. And step number 4 is to repeat this process. Repeat it over and over and over again. Jane Jacobs, the great author who wrote extensively about cities for decades, called cities co-creations, things we build together. And in complex adaptive systems, that's what we see. We see that cities are things where someone does something, other people respond to that. And these responses drive our behaviors. They drive our future responses. What we have become in our complicated way is cities who listen, sure. We'll have surveys, sure. We'll have public hearings and meetings, okay. We'll have visioning sessions, perhaps, listening sessions. But what we've done is we act in large blocks. We act in very large chunks. We do very big projects. What we're not very good at is filling in the details, making things actually work for people, getting back to that co-creation. This is the process for doing that. This is the process for putting meat on the bones. This is the process for making our cities and our neighborhoods more financially productive and successful. We can continue to go down a route like this. This is Lawton, Oklahoma. And I don't mean to pick on them. I like them very much. I was able to spend some time there. There's a lot of people there who care very deeply. But there was a federal program for streetscapes. They had gone there and seen another city that they thought was successful. They had a really nice streetscape. And they said, you know what? If we had a streetscape, we'd be successful too. And so they got the money and they went out and they did a streetscape. And guess what? They're not successful because it's not where their people were struggling. That's not the thing that they needed. That's the solution that they had, but it's not their struggle. Or we can take our cues from a place like Memphis, Tennessee, where you had a little block, Broad Avenue, a couple blocks of a former streetcar stop that was struggling, where the residents humbled themselves to look around and say, all right, where are people struggling, and what is the next smallest thing we can do? And they went out with buckets of paints and brooms, and they cleaned things up and they swept things up. What they did was not flashy, was not spectacular, but the returns that they've seen on that investment are enormous, including a number of buildings that have been recaptured and renovated, increase in desirability of the neighborhood, new businesses that have been started, and throughout the neighborhood now, millions of dollars of investment that have come about because of a very simple project to make a place better. These photos are about 5 years old. If you went out there today, you'll actually see that this has become so successful based on this little intervention that the city's gone and done the next increment, which is to take some of these things and make them permanent. And so now you have permanent raised curb in here. You've got permanent lighting in here. You've got the next step of intensity. And if you go out a couple blocks from here, what do you see? You see places where they've used straw bales and cones and paint to start to recapture those neighborhoods too and make those places better. We could see huge return on investment, see enormous amounts back for our capital if we're willing to take small, humble steps. We can see our places becoming more prosperous and wealthier at the same time that we can see people's lives improve. And that's the essence of a Strong Towns approach. How do we make sound investments that give us a growing level of wealth and prosperity, while at the same time making people's lives better? This is our website, strongtowns.org. We publish 2-3 articles a day. We've got 3 different podcast streams. We do a lot of video. Our stuff is all about communicating this message. This year, we started something called the Action Lab, which is designed to help people implement Strong Towns ideas in their community. I welcome you to visit our site often, to be part of our conversation, to learn from people there who are interacting, and also to add to that knowledge base, because I know there's things that people can learn from you. So thank you for that. I feel like I did all right on time. And if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take the time to talk through them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moran. Mayor had to step out for a few minutes. And so are there any questions or feedback? Yes, Councilor Abeta Stuvey.
Thank you, Mayor.
You can't. Okay. I had my hand up, but that's okay.
Well, your picture isn't on. So get it on, and then I'll acknowledge you, Councilor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And thank you, Mr. Moran. I really appreciate this presentation, and it's gotten, I like the approach, and it's gotten, I think, the wheels turning on a lot of projects that we have going on here, especially when we're looking at the revitalization of the El Paseo Espina corridors, which is very much an older infrastructure part of our town that needs attention and has a lot of opportunity, I think, for that revitalization. As you were presenting as well, I was taking a look at some of the Strong Towns documents that you have, different articles, and I saw a little tiny bit. You didn't touch upon it today, but I wanted to ask your thoughts. And you had some comments about transit and traffic and that approach. And I was wondering if you could comment on that for us, please.
Yeah, we could talk a long time about transit. I actually have a book coming out in November about transportation, and there's a big section in there on transit. And I think I can summarize that by saying that transit is, in a sense, a productivity multiplier. The best transit connects, particularly within a city, connects places people want to be to other places that people want to be. And when we're looking at things like widening out roads, adding lanes, adding corridors, a far more effective approach is to actually build places and connect them with transit. When I look at my city, We just got done changing a 2-lane shortcut into a 4-lane road with roundabouts and what have you. Again, I'll point out, we haven't had any growth in population for 80 years. Yet somehow we have growth in traffic. Who are all these people? Where are they driving? You know, like what good is it if I could walk 3 blocks and get the food I need? Now I have to drive 2 miles to get it. Oh my gosh, now there's more people driving 2 miles, so we need to add more lanes. The reality is that a system of public transit can be in the geometry of a street, the way to get people places, to move them around, and also to leverage those places so that they build wealth over time. I struggle sometimes when we talk about transit as, and I'm gonna, this is not your language, but this is language that I see in other places, as a charitable overlay of our current transportation system. In other words, we've built this auto system, and all the people who get to participate in with the automobile. And the people who don't get to participate in an automobile will have this charitable overlay of a transit system so that they can have like a modest existence within this system that everybody else has kind of built for them. This system is bankrupting our cities. Like, this system doesn't make any sense. And providing a charitable overlay within a system that is financially insolvent is doubly ridiculous. If we want to build great transit, it needs to actually serve places. And so the key to having great transit is to build great places. Great places are going to include people of all income levels, people of all commercial endeavors, of all distributions. When we can connect them and allow them the option, then the automobile becomes an overlay to that system. Sure, you can drive, but you don't have to drive. You can also take transit. You can also walk and bike. You can also get around by other means. And so the automobile becomes an option in that type of a system. That's the way that I would think of transit. Think of it as a wealth multiplier, and you will never have a conversation about our budget's tight, how do we cut transit?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilor Betasubi. Councilor Sorg.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to say I've been a follower of Strong Towns now for a few years, and especially this past year with the COVID-19, there's been a lot of emails. I get your emails now for several years, and this reminds me of a mini New Urbanism Congress that Councilor Forrest would understand for sure, because she's been to one of the New Urbanism Congresses here a couple years ago. And yeah, this is the thing we need to do. I'm strongly in favor of our Strong Towns programs and advocacies and so forth. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you, Councilor Sorg. Councilor Bengomo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Moran. I really appreciated that, and I really I think I really connected with that one of those last slides you had about humbly observing where people are struggling and then asking ourselves, what can we do right now? And I'm totally of the same mindset that we get stuck often in let's do another study and that I'm new to the council, and that's probably been one of the things I've noticed the most, right? And the reality is that often we don't need to study, you just need to see, and that it'll tell you plenty. Councilor Betasubi and Councilor Vasquez and I are both on an ad hoc committee to revitalize 2 big corridors in our community, El Paseo and Solano, which are really struggling. And honestly, they look a lot like that picture you showed of the taco joints or whatever. Big parking lots in the front, right? Take up a lot of space. And now there's a lot of empty buildings. And so as you were talking, I really had a lot of wheels turning when, as you were speaking about that. I did sort of want to ask though about any more recommendations or advice or resources where I can go or we can go look more into how to really work with developers who might not want to focus on infill, right? Who want to focus where the money is.
Yes.
That's in the outer parts of the city. And, but I also, took note of what you said about the bar of entry, right? And understanding that perhaps there are a lot of barriers for developers who might think it's cost prohibitive to work on infill. But I also want to make sure it's fair, right? That there is a fair bar for who gets to participate and develop in those particular places. And so do you have any thoughts, further thoughts about that?
Yes. I'm going to try sharing my screen again. Yes. So a couple very quick things. First, if you go on our website, you'll see an events tab up here. There's a thing called the Locomotive Tour that we're doing. This is a series of how-to courses. And there's one down here about small developers. Where is this one? How to clear a path for small scale developers in your town. Derek Avery is amazing. Core Holdings, he's out of Dallas. He is the kind of guy who said, I grew up in this neighborhood. I love this neighborhood. I want to make this neighborhood work. And he is kind of the quintessential small scale developer. I would try to get into that group because he is, the stuff that he's going to share is fantastic. I think it's important to draw a distinction because, as you said, the developers want to go where the money is. That is a very common thing. That's a very understandable thing, and I don't even lament that. I think it's important to understand that there's a Venn diagram of where developers can make money, where the city does well, where the community does well financially. There's an overlap there. Most of the stuff out on the edge works really well for the developers, but there's no overlap between it working well for the community. The problem is that because all of the systems, whether we're talking about Fannie Freddie or Wall Street financing, whether we're talking about programs through the federal government, they all do really well promoting this stuff out on the edge. It's a lot harder. There's a lot different programs, and the programs get kind of crowded out for the small scale developer. We have to actually, as communities, be very intentional about growing our own small scale developer communities. There's a group called the Incremental Developers Alliance. Incremental Development Alliance is what you want to look up. And they have a program to try to help you train your own small scale developers, people who have been sidelined, who have a difficult time. Maybe they're pounding nails for one of the big developers and they could be their own contractor. They help communities unleash that capacity. And I think it's really important because the neighborhood that you've described, the corridor you're trying to redevelop, and you say it looks like the Taco John's area. What I find in that neighborhood with the Taco John's is that it's full of entrepreneurial people who have been sidelined. It's full of people who work for other people who would like to do carpentry work and do sheetrock work and do insulation work and rehab homes. But the tools are not set up for them. We can create space for that. And if we do, what we'll see is that those investments we're seeking that the current developers say they can't do or they won't do or they're outside of their expertise, people will start doing them, they'll start making money, and then guess what? The other developers will start to join them because that's where the money and the action is.
That's great. Thank you so much. I will definitely check out a couple of these resources. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor,
you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can see you and I can hear you. I thought maybe you might want to say something, Councilor Flores, and Mayor is back.
Yes.
Turn it over.
Oh, so should I wait to recognize me?
Yeah.
I
Yeah, you do look a little familiar.
Yeah. No, I first of all, I want to thank you so much, Mr. Marone. And I will be going to your website. Yes, I'm Councilor Flores, And my raise hand thing isn't working. It just froze. So that's why I'm waving.
Oh, yeah, just to let you know, Adrian was working on this. He checked with Zoom and it is something that's going
problem.
on with
Yeah,
throughout the.
it was working initially and then all of a sudden, oh well. But at any rate, thank you so much. Yes, Counselor, Mayor, at the time it was Mayor Pro Tem Sorg, and the head of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Sharon Thomas, who's also a Mayor Pro Tem Emeritus. We were very fortunate to attend a CNU and in Savannah. And it was a week long. It was like 7 days. It's really intense.
I was there. Yeah.
You were there?
Oh,
No
I
wonder
spoke.
you're so familiar.
Yeah, I spoke like 3 different times. So yeah.
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 Yeah. So, well, it's great to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Yeah. And and it's interesting how you focused on the Lawton, Oklahoma, the rush hour where that street is empty, but they got the money, so let's build it. But the problem was that wasn't where the people's struggle was. And I feel like I'm talking out of the 70s, power to the people and all that sort of stuff. But Broad Avenue, Memphis, Tennessee, with people out there with, it looked like that. Now, can you elaborate on that? Who was it? The people out there, was that the community? How was the struggle identified? Our entire city faces struggles, economic struggles. And so I like to thank Councilor Abeta Stubbe for bringing up the transit component, which is utterly important. But so how did you identify, or how did they identify? How is the struggle identified? And then who were the people who were out there with the paint buckets and drawing all these lines? And what are the complexities? What are the details in doing that? And what was the end result? I mean, what happened as a result of that? Did you just have more people out? Did you have people becoming entrepreneurs? Or what happened there?
Yeah, I'm not able to do chat function on here, which I'm guessing was disabled because of your meeting laws or what have you. But there's this story here called "This Is What We Can Do Together," and if you just search for that on Google, Strong Towns, This Is What We Can Do Together, you will get this story that goes through this. And what you saw in Broad Avenue is you saw a group of people outside of the governmental structure taking ownership of their neighborhood. In Memphis, Tennessee, things are difficult, and oftentimes neighborhoods are completely neglected. And in the absence of someone telling you to say no, one of the beautiful things that has happened in Memphis that doesn't happen in all struggling places is that the people of Memphis have often stepped up and said yes. And so, you can go to places in Detroit and I see a lot of desperation. You can go to other Midwestern cities like Erie, Pennsylvania, or Buffalo, where people are, let me just say, a little more orderly or structured, and they don't do these things. But you go to Memphis, and people in Memphis are like, well, this is dumb. Like, I want to fix this. And they actually go out and start doing it. And if you did that in my city, the city would show up and try to stop you because they're like, this is not something citizens should be doing. But in Memphis, the culture is such, and the lack of kind of institutional capacity is such that people can actually go out and do things. And so what you see is that they have this history in their neighborhoods of people kind of taking ownership of them.
Okay.
On Broad Avenue, people went out and they literally, with brooms, swept up the vacant buildings. They work with the people who owned the buildings, but they got them swept up. They painted a little mural. They painted the crosswalks and the bike lanes. And then they hosted a street party. They invited people in from around the community, and they said, we're going to have a block party here. They shut off the 2 blocks. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't go get a permit to have a block party. They just did. And the thing is that they invited council members too. They're like, hey, come out to our block party. So the council members showed up and they're like, this is great. Like, this block has been dilapidated for decades. This looks really nice. This is a lot of fun. Wow, all my constituents are here. They're having a great time. And they're like, yeah, but we're breaking like a lot of laws. how about we repeal some of those rules? How about we repeal some of those laws? That was the mechanism that they used to kind of get attention of the authorities. Here's what we're doing. After that, people saw like this place can actually be cool. There's people in this neighborhood who we can actually provide service to. And you started to see a little bit at a time, businesses started to fill in there. People started to make a go of it. I was there in 2015. It was, a little like half full. Last in 2019, so a little over like a year and a half ago, I was there, everything was full. And they were, like I said, moving a couple blocks down in different directions. The city went in after that initial project was done by the residents and said, this was very good. You pointed out something that we would not have come up with on our own. What we're going to do is not let it go back. So they went out, and when the paint they got from the local hardware store washed away, they went out and put permanent 3M nice paint down. When the plants started to die, they went out and put in healthier plants and kept them up. They did this to kind of say, you established this, now we're not going to let it go back. But then they started to look and said, okay, there's other things that we can do. For example, we have a bike lane that we're working on that's a regional bike lane that's going to go in 4 blocks from here. Let's reroute that and bring it through this neighborhood. And so they did. They rerouted the bike lane like 4 blocks, had it go right past this street, and basically said, we're going to be spending the money anyway. Let's reinforce these good things that are going on. They're redoing the street that was a block away behind Broad Avenue. That was really difficult to cross. It's kind of the thing that killed the neighborhood, was this highway they ran right through the middle of it. They were doing that at the time, and they said, let's stop and let's change the design of this street so that at least in these 2 blocks, that street has more ability to cross, so people can get across easier and get from the neighborhood to this Broad Avenue. Eventually, they went in and they took Broad Avenue and they said, there's enough going on here where we can take it to the next step. And so they took out the paint and they took out the stuff that was there temporarily, and they put in permanent curb. They actually have raised curb now, trees planted in the middle, nice grass, nice benches. They took it to the next step. But they followed the lead of the neighborhood each step of the way. And I think that's the most important lesson from Broad Avenue, is that it wasn't the city hiring a consultant and coming in with a vision for how the neighborhood could be. It was the city watching the neighborhood evolve and grow, giving them room to kind of shape it themselves, and then helping reinforce those gains so that it didn't fall back into dilapidation or neglect. It's a beautiful story. Broad Avenue is a great place. Yeah,
it is.
There's a book, and I should have recommended it earlier. There's a book called The Tactical Urbanism, written by a couple friends of mine, Mike Lydon and Anthony Garcia. And they describe how projects like this can be used, how these temporary projects can be used to create long-term change. As an engineer, I'm very used to the process where we put out an RFP and we get a $200,000 study, and it tells us 3 options, and nobody really likes the 3 options, but that's what we have to do. The tactical urbanism approach would say, instead of spending $200,000 on a study, spend $50,000 on a temporary set of options so that people can experience them. You can see what happens, how people react, and use that as a way to inform yourself on alternatives, as opposed to something more theoretical.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marone. Mayor Pro Tem Gandara has a question to ask you, or a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Marone, for your presentation. I'm so excited to hear of Strong Towns. Yes, Councilor Sork has been talking about this for several years, and I was like, why does this remind me? Why is this familiar? And we've had these conversations before. So I have a couple of questions and then some comments. It appears like you have to have a membership, right? Or you're not have to, but does the city have a membership?
Well, no, we are. Let me say one thing off the bat. Thank you for smiling during my presentation. It's really hard to do these, talk for an hour, and it's nice to see your faces now and this nice 2-way conversation. But But at first I'm like, I don't know if these people hate me or like me. And then you kept smiling and it's like, okay, I feel better about this. Strong Towns,
Try to be
we're
very cognizant of that. It's not
very nice. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
We are a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3. And so what we have done is said, if you want to donate to us, we call you a member of our movement. You don't have to donate to get access to our materials. You don't have to donate to read our stuff. You don't have to donate. If you would like to support us financially, that's how you do it. You are paying me for this. And so part of that is also a donation to us that helps support what we do. So I deeply appreciate that as well. But if people who want to donate to us, it's a very kind thing. And we obviously helps us spread this message. So.
Thank you for that, Mr. Maroon. So if you are a membership, what does that get you, so to speak? And I'm assuming, as you said, we're paying you. And so we have you for an hour or so of your time. And I'm not sure what next steps would be, but I would recommend that we belong to this, as a member, and really advocate and recommend that you come back and conduct a more thorough work session so we can sort of understand from our strategic planning session now to our budget, planning session. We're in the process of connecting the dots, so to speak, with our Elevate Las Cruces, but I have a lot of interest in what you're saying, and so what would the membership get you?
Thank you. Let's focus on those two things separately. The first one about follow-up. Michelle has been, my staff has been in contact with your staff, and we will certainly talk about ways to do that. I'm getting on a plane on Wednesday and going to Dallas, Texas, to do a similar workshop, and we do those all the time. Obviously, more difficult, a little bit of a struggle during the pandemic. Hopefully we can get to a point where we can schedule that and do that at some point in the future, but we would love to help you think through these things. That would be separate from a membership. And we don't even, for us, a membership is really the way we have individuals donate to us to help us with our mission. And so if any of you as individuals are interested in that, but we don't do like consulting or services in that way. Like I'm never going to write a plan. We can help you get connected to people who will, but I am happy to do things like this where we can help you think through and talk about. We also have something called the Strong Towns Academy that we launched last year. That is a series of online courses to help you kind of go through this. We can do those in person. We can do those as supplements to those courses, or you can do that. We would like to help you, and we would like to help really every community in North America think about how they can transition from the approach they're using right now to something that would build better prosperity for people within the community, and do it financially so that you're stronger and have more options.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I really want to recommend to staff that we think about, get our creative hats on and think about how we can utilize Strong Towns moving forward. I can think of many opportunities in each one of our districts that could really benefit from this kind of thinking. I'm very interested in building local wealth, and especially here now with COVID, when I hear people of color, Latinx communities are really struggling to get, it's going to take us longer, right, to regain our wealth, if you will. And so anything that you can do, I think would be really, really helpful. And since you mentioned the urban tactilism, we have our own forms of those through Doniana Communities United and Beloved Community. They often have invited me and others to do safety walks to talk about what just a bucket of paint can do, right, to slow traffic down and those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of that happening in our community today. And so thank you. I'm just so interested in this, and I think we really, again, I'd like to recommend the council to have you come back and help, sort of solidify some of our ideas moving forward with connecting the dots related to our comprehensive plan. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I would enjoy that. Thank you.
No, I'll echo her comment, Mayor Pro Tem's comments. Chuck, your presentation was very well received and really interesting. And anytime you want to come back, just let us know.
I would love that. Let's plan on it. As soon as we can travel, I would very much like to make it down there and meet all of you in person and walk your neighborhoods and have a really nice conversation with you about how we help.
Yeah, send a picture of those colored tostadas or chips that you're talking about.
I will.
Swedish.
I'll do that. Norwegian, Mexican food. Yeah, I'm my. The thing that Taco John's is most known for is something called the potato ole, which is a tater tot dipped in mild nacho cheese. So I'm not claiming that it's authentic, but it does taste good.
Yeah. No.
You must have been very hungry
I was
with your
gonna say
presentation. You talked about tacos and pizza.
Yeah, it's noon here, so I'm gonna go get a bite to eat now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We love to share our cuisine with you, Chuck.
I would love that.
Oh.
Yes.
We have some wonderful food here, and
The
you'll be
best.
red or green. What's your, our New Mexico question, red or green or Christmas? And so be thinking about that.
I will. Thank
You
you
do
so
know
much.
the chili capital of the world is only 30 miles north of us here. So
Seriously?
40 miles. Yeah, Hatch, New Mexico.
See, I'm from central Minnesota, and ketchup is a spice here. So, this,
And
Better-
when you have a
Better than
chance,
calling it a vegetable.
yeah, that's
you have
true.
a chance, you can go to New Mexico State University and they'll show you a chili, literally so hot, no human can eat it. It's used for commercial purposes to make a whole vat of whatever it is that they want to make it hot. I mean, that
Wow.
chili, they made it. It's handmade. They did whatever they need to do, and it's hot. I mean, just the smell of it is
Yeah.
burn your.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will do my best.
Okay, good.
We will plan on it, and you all can get a chuckle at me struggling with hot, spicy stuff.
Okay.
I look
it'd be
forward
kind
to
of
it.
cruel to have you eat some hot chili. So.
We'll see. I'll be okay. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Take
Chuck.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I wanted to tell Chuck that I'm also from Minnesota.
Oh, wonderful.
Norwegian and Mexican food is. I'm familiar with Taco John's. I never liked it up there even. It's so much better down here.
Yeah, I'm positive of that. Cool.
And I'm looking forward that we implement all the strong town ideas in our city ASAP. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gil.
You
Appreciate
bet.
that.
You're welcome.
I thought
Take
you were
care,
from
everybody.
Montana.
Come on.
No, I'm just
I
kidding.
didn't tell this story. I did live in
I'm
Montana
just-
for quite a few years,
I'm just
but it's
messing with
almost
you.
the same as Minnesota. It's roughly the same.
I'm just messing with you. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, the raised hand feature is missing, so I'm trying to.
Oh. Okay, go ahead, Shoshana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City councilors, I just wanted to mention to you that almost everything that Chuck talked about in terms of how we invest in our infrastructure and incremental development, elevate through that document, you have, along with our community stakeholders, have really coalesced and agreed that this is the path we want to go down, or road, we want to go down, no pun intended. But we're here today to talk about the CIP as well. So I do want to hand over to Mr. David Cedillo. But real quickly before that, I do want to mention Mayor Pro Tem mentioned El Paseo, and I know, Councilor Bencomo, Councilor Aveda Stubbe, as well as Councilor Vasquez are really on the El Paseo Solano Ad Hoc Committee, and we have an intention to bring Chuck to that committee. So we're already kind of working along those lines. And also the Incremental Development Alliance that he mentioned, we've already, reached out to them. So that's also part of the game plan. And so with that, I really will just hand over to David Cedillo. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shoshana. And good morning, Mayor, councilors. David Cedillo, Public Works Director. And I'll be going over the capital improvement program with you as part of this retreat. Before I start, can everyone see the full screen of the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I know we've gone through this before, and people say, well, why do we have a CIP? Well, we have a CIP for multiple reasons. One of the main ones is that it's in the city charter and specifically in section 5.05. Now, what this states is that the city manager has to prepare and submit to council for approval as part of the budget a 5-year capital improvement program. But there are also some other important items for us to recognize and why we do that. Number one is it is required by the Department of Finance Authority to participate in the 2022 legislative sessions, or any session for that. It is required to obtain those types of fundings with grants, federal, legislative. And lastly, it actually helps us move forward with those initiatives that council has set forth for the organization and the community as we move forward. So with that, in peak performance, which aligns with the council approved initiatives, we're able to measure our results from Elevate Las Cruces. We're able to be proactive and look at those things in the future, such as the active transportation plan. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're predictable by ensuring that the plans that we've set out for that sustainable growth aligns with those department master plans, which also coincide with Elevate Las Cruces. Now, a quick overview of it is essentially, it is what the CIP is a balancing act with what our needs are, council's priorities, and our community needs with the resources that we have. So the program gives us that ability to use it as a guide to work on those things that we've mentioned before and those priorities that have been set out. We want to make sure that we're taking care of not only the stuff that new assets that we need, but also what we already have in place. This provides us that roadmap to be able to do that. And it also involves a lot of things from the community, financing and coordination, and it allows us to make sure that we're able to work on those items that are needed. Now, just a refresher, I know we've seen this before, but the CIP has 4 major parts. And if you notice here, they're based on the projects, the funded capital projects, the infrastructure improvement plan, and then lastly, the funding sources. So again, just to re-highlight, the funded projects are those projects that have the available funding during that fiscal year. The next 5 years are those that are in line but have not been funded yet. And so I'll go ahead and go over what that schedule is as we go through that process. Many of you are well aware that this is a cyclical process. And I want to touch base on a couple of things that Leanne touched on her presentation earlier, but I think it's very, very important. And one of those things is that we've added a step to the process. So that step that we're adding is a review with council in March prior to the public hearing and then ultimately the adoption in May. So what does this do? This gives that opportunity based on feedback that we've received from council, city manager's office, and we take all that information through this process. That starts in October, November. We go through that, we collect that. Internally, we'll meet as a committee and we'll rank those projects, and you'll see further on in the matrix how that's done. But we take those and we prioritize them to be able to prepare a draft. And once we come into the budget season in January, we create that draft, and there's that new step. in March, where we'll come back and we'll review that with council. And again, we'll proceed through the following steps of having the public hearing in April, approval in May, and then the next part of that process is that we will have to enter that approved, the projects from the CIP that are going to be eligible for submission into the ICIP database. Now, it's very important, I'll follow up on a next slide of what the difference is between those two, the CIP and the ICP. But those projects have to be entered into the state's web database by September. And again, to align with that, we will begin our meetings with council for the next legislative priority session and identifying those. And then ultimately, that following January is the legislative session. So I mentioned that I was going to go over what those differences are between the CIP and ICIP. In the past, there have been some questions on what is the CIP and what is the ICIP. Well, as I've mentioned before, the CIP is a 6-year program, one that's funded and 5 years of unfunded projects. That is managed by Public Works and is continuous. And when I say Public Works, I don't mean myself. That goes a lot of credit to our management analyst, Sarah Cundiff. But as you have seen as of late, over the past year, there have been amendments that come to council on a monthly cycle to report on any of those changes through budget. Now, for the ICIP, that is a database that's housed in the New Mexico Department of Finance Authority in the local government division. Now, that is the 5-year plan. If you recall back on the last screen, it's those 5 years that are not funded, and those projects are eligible to be submitted and considered for additional funding, either through appropriations, grants, federal dollars, and that's why it's important to have them on the CIP. And lastly, to make any changes to that, if the project was not on the CIP or submitted by September, the only way that can get on is through special permissions from the State Department of Finance Authority. Once they give that approval, then a project may be added for consideration coming into the next legislative session. So what are some of those funding sources that we have available to us as a mechanism for the CIP? We have bonds and loans, which comprise of our street and flood, utilities, HHGRT, the VAD that we currently have right now, which is a voluntary assessment district, and New Mexico Finance Authority loans. We also have local taxes with our 2 mil levy, 0.25% GRT, and our environmental GRT. We have state and federal. This can be seen as CDBG funds, state and federal monies, as well as state appropriations. And then lastly, fees and services in the forms of utility rates or impact fees. As we've discussed and gone through the process, we've all recognized that input from stakeholders is very important. We gather that input from city council, from the public, departments as we go through, the city manager's office, and also nonprofit organizations. But one thing that I really wanted to highlight was infrastructure assessments. Now, it's great to have a lot of input and information. We also need to take into consideration those infrastructure assessments that'll help us guide that road to our priorities and recognize that we address those. A lot of discussion was just held with, with what are the needs of our community. Having those assessments through infrastructure will help us recognize and gather and make sure we have a roadmap for that. Next, I want to go ahead and go over the matrix. This is part of the CIP process that departments and nonprofit groups will go over. And as you've noticed over the years, this has evolved. It has changed. Well, it's no different this year. This year, we really recognize, and when I say we a lot of people within the organization, city manager's office, city council, the public, they gave us feedback that said we need to look at how we're ranking these projects and giving them value. So with that, an internal committee of volunteers got together to move forward with this. And the product that we're going to see here is really that acceptance of council's plan with Elevate Las Cruces. So I want to point out the system, or basically the mechanism is the same, but I want to highlight some of those changes that we've done. So if you can see on the screen, and I do apologize if it's a little small, but it will be provided in the packet or the presentation. You can come back to that. But one of those things that we wanted to recognize to be able to give those projects weighted value is these criteria over here on the left. Now, if you recognize, there are some that are ranked higher, and that's because we feel as a committee and with the adoption of Elevate Las Cruces, that would give the biggest priority ranking on how we want to move forward. Some of those are community benefit, which help improve those living standards. SHE, which is safety, health, environmental, and emergency factors. Planning alignment, this goes towards that Elevate Las Cruces, the Sustainability Action Plan, the Active Transportation Plan. And that segues right into the one down below with sustainability and water conservation. External capital, funding, budgetary impacts. How is your project either positively affecting impacts to the budget or negatively affecting those? Scheduling, are those projects ready to go? And then lastly, external requirements. Again, that could be anything that's a mandate. A great example is the House bill that was passed requiring officers to require body cams. And then lastly, I just want to point out, based on the weighted averages as you go through and rank projects, you'll get a score. And that'll depict whether your score is in the low, medium, and high range. That'll help departments as they go through their projects be able to prioritize them and move those forward for consideration. And now I just want to show you what the final product is. All of you guys are very well aware, but again, it has those four major parts: the projects, the funded column, the CIP, or those outer 5 years, and then lastly, the funding sources. Now, I really want to highlight and make sure that we also recognize is that this right here is where those rankings will go based on council review, nonprofits, and departments. That's where the rankings will be provided as we move forward with a finalized list. I also wanted to touch base on when we do accept funding, or we recognize that we are going to be having some funding but have not yet received it into the city's coffers and is eligible for spending. A great example of those are legislative appropriations and any bond cycles that we have as an organization. Those are listed out in the first outer year. And then once council approves a resolution to accept those monies, we move them into the funded column and then can start expending those. And then lastly, just the legend down at the bottom. I want to go over just a few key projects that the organization has been working on and we'll get through. Here, the first project that we have is the Las Cruces Police Department Solar Array. This project was completed in August of 2020. So it did provide a shade canopy along with solar panels that are producing electricity that is being used at the police department's main building on Spruce. The next project is the Travis water and gas improvements. And the reason we wanted to highlight this project is, I don't know if people can tell, but this is adjacent to and incorporated in as part of the I-25 University project that NMDOT is moving forward with, in conjunction also in collaboration with NMSU. the utilities department was able to use their own forces to improve the water and gas along Travis. Many of you may know that this is being developed and 2 roundabouts are being put to have an underpass under University. So this project, and I do want to highlight, the utility work was completed in December, and that is 100% complete. Not NMDOT's project. This is just the utility improvements that the utility department was able to do in conjunction and coordination with NMDOT and NMSU. Next, we have the pre-1965 Foothills Land Excavation Project. Many of you may not recognize the project as this, but this is where the East Lowman Development site is going to move forward with. These are the efforts that utility is moving forward with, removing the waste in that area, or the identified waste. At this point in time, that project's 95% complete and should be completed by the end of February. One of the amazing things, though, I don't want to pass on, though, is if you look at the end of December, there was 26,282 tons of waste removed from that site thus far. Next, we have Landscaping Bond Median Improvement Phase 1. This is a project from our Parks and Rec department. That project currently right now is at 84% complete. It should be completed in February, here the next month. And as you can see, this project addressed those medians that were bare, didn't have any improvements. One other important thing is that this project, Phase 1, had at least one site within each district that was improved as part of the medians. The next project I want to highlight is the Brannigan Library ADA improvements. This is really a great example of that public input that we received based on issues that patrons saw with the existing conditions. And I'd like to draw your attention down here to this photo in the right bottom corner. The way it was before is there was 2 pathways that were divided by a rail, and then the entire usable space was limited. So although the slopes met ADA, they were still, based on the distance, really hard for some patrons to be able to come up and down. What the final product is we were able to remove those barriers from the middle. We were able to flatten those slopes and make it a more gradual and easier access into the facility. And then lastly, at the bottom, we were able to incorporate a drainage catchment, which was there, and be able to capture any of that stormwater runoff or anything that came through and push it over and utilize it over in the landscaped area just north of the facility. The next project we have here is a roadway project. It is Toshiro Drive. It's the widening project, and it is located between Motel Boulevard and Valley Drive. And I really wanted to showcase this project because there was a lot of coordination with different projects and different entities. If you can see, or you can see my pointer, we have a lateral and see a drain that comes through here. That is going to be a connection point with our Go Bond trail system. So during the design, incorporated and coordinated in those efforts. We also had a major coordination effort with the Las Cruces Public Schools. As you can see here, it does affect properties that they have. So we coordinated with them during the design and with public input, because we didn't know how we were going to interact with those football games, baseball games. So we worked out through those details. But there was major coordination with this here. There was also some right-of-way items that we were able to work out with the school system as well. And then lastly, just some improvements for everyone to know is this intersection at Motel and Toshiro will be signalized with the project. Currently, right now, they have installed storm drain, and they're currently installing water line. They're about 30% complete. And then lastly, I just wanted to bring this forward to council to recognize that this project has started. It was a big initiative with our sustainability aspect as we move forward. Right now, the project is at 20% complete. It is estimated to be completed by the end of November this year. Currently, right now, they are doing number one of the 4 items addressed as part of this contract, which they're improving lighting and replacing those systems with LED lighting. And with that, that concludes that portion of it. And both Leanne, Srijana, and I are available to answer any questions that Mayor or Council may have.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome, Mayor.
So let's see who has their hand up. I can only see like 3 of you, 2 of you, so I got to keep scrolling the screen. Why don't I just do this? I'll just go down the line. Council Mayor Pro Tem Gandara, Flores, Sorg, Bencomo, and Beta Stubi. How about that? And then I'll rotate it the other way. Okay. And if you don't have anything, then just say I don't have anything. So Mayor Pro Tem.
I don't have anything, Mayor.
Okay. Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Cedillo, for your excellent presentation. I'm sorry I was called away for a little emergency. So I missed the part, some of it, which is okay because anyway. Can you go back and I think it was slide 33, 32, 33, 34, the medians? Your discussion about the medians?
Good morning, Mayor, Councilor Flores, David Cedillo, Public Works Director. Are you able
and 32
to see the screen?
Yes, I can see the screen well, and I just saw that 32 would also be very helpful. So I hate to burden everybody, but if you'd be so kind as to review 32 and 33 again, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Not a problem. Not a problem, Councilor. David Cedillo, Public Works Director, and Councilor Flores. Here on this slide, we have the pre-1965 Foothills landfill excavation. This is where utilities is removing the waste, which is going to be the East Loman development area. So this is the area across from the hospital, which is Mountain View. And this is the remediation that they're doing at that site. They should be done by the end of next month, and currently they're at about 95% complete. Do you have any questions on this slide?
No, I don't much.
The next one is part of the landscape bond median improvement phase 1 project. And these are some examples of the finished product in medians where there were no improvements. But most importantly is that at least one median within each council district has a site as part of this project.
Mr. Cedillo, was that part of the where the city council? It was before I was on city council, I believe. Well, definitely not during, where monies were allocated based on a fund, or was that there was a bond, and then the city councilors decided to divide that evenly among the districts, and that's why the districts there's at least one in each district. The project, there is a project within each district.
Mayor, Councilor Flores, let me see if I can attempt to answer, because it looks like you have a couple of questions there. So the funding for this did come from a bond. Based on that bond and the amount that was received, there was enough money to include 13 different sites under this first phase. Out of those 13 sites, there are at least one site within each council district.
Have all those sites been identified, Mr. Cedillo?
Yes, ma'am. I believe for phase 2, Parks and Rec is working on those additional sites, but these sites here. Yes, ma'am.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, these sites here were identified based on need, and then the second phase is going through the same process.
And Parks and Rec is doing that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cedillo. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Counselor Sorg, you have a question?
Yeah, just one real quick one. If Mr. Cedillo could go back to the slide that was entitled Input Continued Projects Capital of Price Prioritization. Yeah, that's it. Partly because we barely can read what's in here, but also I didn't hear, and I might have missed it, where the city council comes into this, making these prioritizing projects. At what point and where does the city council be part of this process?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, thank you for the question. To answer that, this matrix is the matrix that staff uses to move and rank their projects. We will be meeting with council separately. Budget and Public Works will be meeting with you and others individually in March prior to a work session to discuss the CIP and those projects that have been brought forward. Also with those ones that you have identified in our prior meetings back in October, November.
Okay. Now my memory isn't all that great. I don't remember October and November that well, but it looks like these prioritizations are already done before it comes to the city council. Am I wrong on that?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, these are part of the CIP process. And when we get information from city council on those types of projects, city staff will be, excuse me, let me get back to that. City staff will be filling out the forms for those projects that have been identified. So city staff will be doing that work based on those priorities that council is bringing forward as part of our meetings.
So give me an example. Say a city councilor gives you a project. What happens to that project in the process?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, that's an excellent question. How we would handle that as we move forward is we would get information from you or any other council member to move forward with the project, and we will ask questions based on these criteria. That'll help us rank that project to give it a weighted value. That weighted value, we can then rank it as either a low range, medium range, and high range. That's just an initial range ranking, but when we develop the CIP, it is always council's opportunity to move projects that may be of a medium range and not a high range up further into the acceptance of that project to be included in the CIP. So what we would do is get that information from you or any other counselor, and we would ask all these questions. That way we could fill that form out for you.
So how would a project get this weight of 8 in the community benefit? What aspects or what parts of this process or aspects of the project, I should say, would give it a 8? I can barely read it here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the weighted value is 8 based on where it falls within the criteria value, which is either a 0, a 1, a 2, or a 3, based on how it matches with the project criteria. That is a multiplier. So the 8 gives it, say you rank it a 3 on this line, and you give it an 8, well, then that weighted value is 24 for that line of community benefit. So as you go through,
you multiply
yes,
the two numbers.
It's your multiplier. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So who's decided whether the project has significant community benefit for residents and end users? Who decides that should be a 3?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, that is going to be the department, the council or city manager, whoever is having that project come forward to be considered, they are the ones who are giving and or assigning what that weighted value is or that criteria value is.
So it could be the city manager or it could be staff.
Yes, it could be departments with their projects and their priorities and their department plans that align with the city's strategic goals. These
In
are
my-
also ranked by our nonprofit organizations as well too.
Yeah, okay. Okay, it's complex, I understand. But at what point would you give it a 3 if a city councilor said this is really important? Would you ever give it a 3 if just the city councilor said it was real important?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, I would say that we would have to make sure that it meets within those criteria.
Yeah, that's the thing. Who decides what the criteria is?
Those inputters of the project, correct.
Yeah.
But that for council, that's going to be that information that we get from you, and we'll ask those questions if it meets these, and we'll give you that feedback.
Oh yeah, it would be good to get questions asked and answered. Good.
Yes, sir.
I started to understand a little bit more. When you have problems, when you come to us as individuals in the council, it would be a good idea if you had all the possible projects from the least valuable to the most valuable and everything in between list given to us, so we could look it over a few days ahead of time, at least, and try to figure out, what we would rank them at. I don't recall doing that in the past, but it might have been done, but it seems to me when it was done, it was like 10 plus years ago, but it wasn't done like this. It was a ranking that the council did in a different way. And I agree, there's maybe no wrong or right way to do this, but and this could be a much better way to do it. In fact, in some ways I can see it is. But I would like to see a list of every project that not only the city councilor is talking about, but other councilors and the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if that could be done when it comes to us in March, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Sorg.
Thank you, Councilor Sorg. Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey?
I don't have any extra questions. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. Anybody else have any additional questions? Yes, Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thanks so much, David. Can you go back to the slide where you had CIP and ICIP sort of laid out differently? There we go. I guess maybe I should have asked this a long time ago. Are the funding sources for both of these the same funding sources?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, they can be.
They can be.
And when I say they can be, is because the projects that are in the ICIP in those outer unfunded years are part of the CIP. So yes, whenever we identify those for the ICIP, they are part of the CIP. So they can be, but they don't necessarily have to be.
Okay, so the ICIP is basically projects that are it's like a sub-layer to the CIP. No?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, they are, but it's also other projects from departments that have a plan on working on their other initiatives that they have or priorities from council.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. That's helpful to understand. That's my only question, Mayor Pro Tem.
You're welcome, Councilor.
Okay, so I'm back. Sorry about that. So I'm sorry, did Councilor Abeyta-Stuvey, you were asked, you didn't have any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, great. Okay, so David, who's next on the presentation?
Mayor, as a matter of fact, we don't have anyone next. We're good to go if you guys are ready. However, I will turn it over to Leanne for any closing remarks.
Okay, you got it.
Oh, Mayor, Council, this is Leanne Demush, Chief Budget Officer for the record. Just want to give a great thank you for being with us today for our budget retreat. This is something that we do once a year, but this year, as you can see, we are really trying to integrate the mayor and the council into our budget. So, hopefully we won't pester you a lot, but you will be seeing meetings popping up on your invitations, on your calendar. And again, I'd like to stress, if you have any questions after this presentation that come up, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for, is to help you. I have sent out an email to all of you. It contained the PowerPoint that we presented. It also had a link to Strongtown. Please look that over. We're glad that you enjoyed it. And I just want to thank everybody that helped us with today. And we just really appreciate you supporting us like you do. Thank you so much, Mayor.
Thanks, Leanne. Thank you all for your presentations and great meeting. And so if there's nothing further, then entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Leanne.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Candela, second by Councilor Bencomo. Christine, call the roll, please.
Yes, this is on the motion to adjourn the budget retreat. Councilor Beta Stuvey,
Yes.
Councilor Vasquez is absent. Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Councilor Sorg,
Yes.
Councilor Flores,
Yes.
Councilor Gandara,
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes. Okay, we're adjourned. It's 11:44 a.m. See you all in about 74 minutes. Okay, bye.
Bye.